Okay, guys, today we're going to be looking at the Ottoman Empire, the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, and we have been discussing some of this in class already, but I wanted to make sure that we were all clear on some of the things. So we're going to go back through this presentation and do a quick review of some of the things that we've already discussed, and we're going to add some new things. So again, you want to be adding these things to your notes. You want to double check and make sure that you've got some of these things down, and hopefully this will clear up anything if you've got any misgivings or you didn't understand some things as we were going through this presentation during class. So with that being said, let's dive into the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so when we talk about the Ottoman Empire, we've got to talk about how it began. Of course, it starts to rise around the time of the 13th century, late 13th century. The Turks or the Ottomans who live in this area have been granted land by a group known as the Seljuk Turks, which the reason why they got this land was because they had agreed to fight with the Seljuk Turks against the Mongols. And the land that they got was the northwest corner of what was known as the Anatolian Peninsula. The Anatolian Peninsula later becomes the country of Turkey. The Ottomans also expanded westward during this time into the Bosporus Straits and the Straits of Dardanelles. All of these things are strategic locations because where the Anatolia Peninsula is in between Europe and Asia. So there's a lot of trade routes that are leading into this area. The Silk Road actually led into this area as well. So again, this is a pretty strategic location, and the Ottoman Turks are going to be the ones who are going to take over and eventually start the Ottoman Empire from this location. The Byzantine Empire was one of the empires that the Ottomans are going to run into conflict with. The Byzantines had been around since the fall of the Roman Empire in the year 453 AD. And so the Byzantines had been there for a while. It's going to be the Ottomans, though, that eventually are going to expand and take over a lot of what used to be the Byzantine Empire. The Ottomans are also going to expand themselves into the Balkans in the 14th century. The Balkans, mainly the areas around Greece, Serbia, Croatia, those areas today are the Balkans. But this is where the Ottomans were going to expand from the Anatolian Peninsula into the Balkans. The Ottoman ruler who is in charge is a person known as the Sultan, and the Sultan is going to build the military up. He's going to be the political and military leader of the Ottomans. And he's also going to create an elite guard of soldiers known as the Janissaries. And what the Janissaries were usually Christians who had been turned into slaves as children, and they were converted to the religion of Islam. And then from that, they could actually serve as foot soldiers or administrators to the Sultan. So the Janissaries played a major role in serving the Sultan. One of the reasons why the Ottomans were able to expand was their heavy use of firearms, and again, many of the empires in this area became known as the gunpowder empires. They had an advantage over a lot of the groups that lived around them, which allowed them to take control of those groups. By the 1390s, the Ottomans had gone and defeated the Serbs at the Battle of Kosovo, and eventually they're going to annex an area known as Bulgaria shortly after that. For the next 300 years, the Ottomans would expand into Western Asia, North Africa, and to Europe. Under Mehmed II, the Ottomans began to end the Byzantine Empire. Mehmed is going to lay siege to the city of Constantinople, which was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. He's going to start this assault in 1453. He's going to use cannons, and he's going to pretty much outnumber most of the Byzantines. Byzantines are going to fight back desperately for 2 months, but eventually are forced to surrender to the Ottomans. With Constantinople in their hands, the Ottomans again are going to expand and dominate the Balkans and the Anatolian Peninsula. They're going to rename Constantinople into Istanbul. And between the years of 1514 to 1517, the Ottomans are going to take control of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Arabia, and also this would include the Muslim holy cities of Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina. The Ottomans tried to complete their conquest of the Balkans, which would have given them complete and total control of that area with the Battle of the Danube, but they would be stopped at that battle. In keeping up with Muslim practices, the Ottomans administered conquered regions through local rulers, and this made it sort of easy because people were more willing to accept the Ottomans because of this. The Ottomans also had a strong central government, very structured, very organized, and one of the ways that they ran that government was through officials known as the pashas. The pashas collected taxes, they kept law and order, and they were pretty much responsible for the Sultan's court. One of the main sultans, and probably one of the most important sultans, was a guy named Suleiman. Suleiman is actually considered Suleiman the Magnificent. He begins his reign around 1520, and he's going to rule the longest of any of the sultans of the Ottoman Empire. He's going to advance as far as Vienna in Italy. Remember, Vienna was a major city during that time, trading city that was extremely important. The Ottomans would extend their power into Western Mediterranean and then eventually westward, but they're going to be stopped by the Spanish at a famous battle known as the Battle of Lepanto, which was a naval battle in 1571. So up until the second half of the 17th century, the Ottomans were content with their conquest. In 1683, again, they're going to try to attack Vienna, which it's going to end up being a loss for the Ottomans. And from that point on, they're going to be pushed out of Central Europe, never to threaten Central Europe ever again. Again, the Ottoman Empire was often referred to as the Gunpowder Empire. This was because of their heavy use of firearms. These empires were formed by conquerors, principally based on their mastering of the technology of firearms, and the Ottomans were some of those people. Like we said earlier, the Sultan is the head of the Ottoman system, and the Sultan was the state's political and military leader. A lot of the sons that would take over for their fathers who were sultans would end up being in conflict with each other. We've sort of talked about what fratricide was, and that was where the sultan would actually have his brother and his family murdered so that they could not assume the throne. Only his sons could assume the throne. So these sons would often battle for succession, and this is going to eventually cause some conflict throughout the Ottoman Empire's history. The Ottoman Empire was divided into provinces and districts. Each one of these districts is going to be governed by officials who collected taxes and supplied armies from their areas, which we discussed. The Sultan would give most of the land to his senior officials, so those guys would become pretty wealthy. Remember that the Ottomans are mainly remembered for spreading the religion of Islam. They're in a strategic location And because of that strategic location, they are going to be able to extend the religion of Islam into parts of Europe, parts of Asia, parts of Africa as well. The Ottoman rulers, the sultans, were considered to be caliphs as they were responsible for guiding and maintaining Islamic law. So these caliphs, again, were the sultans in pretty much every single way. And they were the people who were going to be responsible for maintaining Islamic law. Um, Ottoman rulers generally were tolerant of other religions, other people that were non Muslims. And if you were a non Muslim in the Ottoman Empire, you paid a special tax, but you were free to practice your religion as long as you paid their tax. Most of the European areas that the Muslims conquered were allowed to remain Christians. And remember, I think I mentioned this in class, how uh, the, the Ottomans would actually take 20% of the children, male children, from some of these Christian areas, and they would turn them into eventually into some of the Janissary soldiers. Large numbers of people living in Bosnia, which is in the Balkans, um, converted to Islam, even though it was a mainly Christian area. So, what were going to be some of the problems that the Ottomans are going to eventually face and lead to their decline? Um, Again, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire reached its high point, and he ruled the longest of any of the sultans. After Suleiman's death, though, that's when things began to fall apart for the Ottoman Empire. Rich, elite families are going to assume power, they were mainly out for wealth and for power. The government began to lose the rural people, the people living outside of some of the larger cities, causing a lot of the local officials to become corrupt. So, this was another reason why they began to have problems. Taxes began to rise because of all the wars that the Ottomans were involved in, and so their treasury uh, began to become depleted, and they didn't have a lot of money left, especially after fighting in a lot of these wars. Now, throughout the rest of the 1500s into the 1600s and 1700s, the Ottomans began their decline in power after several military defeats. In the mid 1600s, the empire was restored for a short period of time after military victories in Persia and Venice. In 1699, though, the empire again began to lose territory and power, began to lose territory and power as they started advancing into the 1700s. Ottoman art was also pretty unique. The sultans encouraged art. Um, they produced a lot of pottery, rugs, silk, other textiles, jewelry, armor, and all of these things flourished under the Ottomans. The greatest Ottoman artistic accomplishment was really in architecture or building, especially the mosque of the 16th century. A lot of the mosques were modeled after the famous church, which you see up here in the upper right hand corner, the Hagia Sophia, which was a Christian church that was built by the Byzantines in the 4th and 5th century by the Emperor Justinian, who was a Byzantine emperor. You can see the Hagia Sophia, which is still there today in the city of Constantinople, which today is called Istanbul. Under the Ottomans, the silk industry began to resurface. Factories began to produce silk wall hangings, sofa covers, and court costumes. And peasants, artisans, merchants, and pastoral people, or nomads, people that moved from place to place, were the four main occupational groups in the Ottoman Empire. In the 1700s, the Ottoman Empire began to rapidly deteriorate even more following the Russo-Turkish Wars, and a series of treaties during that time caused the empire to lose some of its economic independence. The Crimean War, which came after this, weakened them even further from 1853 to 1856. And by after 1856, the independence of the Ottoman Empire was recognized by the Congress of Paris, but it was still losing strength as a European power. By the late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire is still there, but there's been several rebellions that have occurred, and they've continued to lose territory. Political and social instability in the 1890s created international negativity towards the empire, and the Ottoman Empire began to be referred to at this point as the sick man of Europe. The Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 and the uprising by a lot of Turkish nationalists in this area are going to further reduce the empire of its territory and increase its instability. Following the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire officially came to an end with the Treaty of Sevres. With that treaty, the Ottoman Empire is going to be split up and broken into different areas that would become smaller countries that are still in existence even to this day. So, what's the importance of the Ottoman Empire? Well, when we look back at it, really, we realize that the Ottoman Empire was one of the largest and longest lasting and most successful empires throughout world history. They spread culture because of their size and because of their location. Their location is key because they're between two large continents, Europe and Asia. So they're going to spread a lot of that culture from both continents to other parts of their empire, which again is going to impact those people from there on in. There's also many other reasons as to why this empire was successful, as it was, but some of them include its very strong and organized military and its centralized political structure. And we saw that. They were really good at using firearms. They were good at conquering these other areas, and they had a pretty good government, with most of it revolving around the Sultan. These early successful governments make the Ottoman Empire one of the most important in history and allowed it to last for a very, very long time. And that is the end. Some things that you definitely want to make sure that you pay attention to: how the Ottoman Empire rises. Remember with Osman the First, which we discussed. Remember how they eventually spread from that point on, from 1299. You need to know the political structure based around the Sultan. You need to know a little bit about Ottoman art and how they focused on the silk industry. You definitely want to make sure that you're familiar with all those things and how they really gained their importance under Suleiman and after their conquering of Constantinople in 1453, how that changed things for them. But go back and look over your notes, and hopefully you got something out of this, and I will catch you guys on the next one.